You got what you needed. You asked. They reassured you. They said yes. They still care, yes. You're not too much, yes. Everything's fine. And you felt it. Briefly, that specific relief that's almost physical. But the worst part isn't that it didn't last. The worst part is that you already know your next move. Another question, another way of circling back to check. Another bid for confirmation that made you feel okay for exactly 3 minutes before the need reconstituted itself. You're not needy. You're not insecure for reasons that are permanent. There is a specific psychological reason the reassurance never fills what it's supposed to fill. And there's an equally specific reason some people don't need it. Not because they're emotionally superior, but because something different was built inside them. This is what was built, and how you build it. Section 1. What reassurance seeking actually is. Here's what most people misunderstand about needing reassurance. They think it's about insecurity, that if they just felt better about themselves, if they just had more confidence, the need would go away. It won't. Not that way. What reassurance seeking actually is functionally, psychologically, is an anxiety management strategy. A way of briefly reducing an internal alarm by getting an external signal that the threat isn't real. It works, in the short term, in the same way scratching works on a mosquito bite. The itch subsides for 30 seconds. Then it comes back. Worse, the relief is real. That's not the problem. The problem is that every time you use reassurance to manage the anxiety, you're teaching your nervous system something. It will remember, the way to feel okay is to get confirmation from outside. And the more you teach it that lesson, the louder the alarm gets when external confirmation is immediately available. You haven't become more needy over time. You've made the strategy more load-bearing, and the structure is starting to show the weight. Section 2. The science. In the late 1960s, developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth designed what became one of the most replicated studies. She placed infants and their caregivers in a room with toys. Then the caregiver left, then returned, then a stranger entered. She watched how they used their caregiver as a base from which to explore the world. What she found defined the field of attachment theory. Infants with consistently responsive caregivers, whose presence was reliable and warmth not conditional, used their caregiver as a secure base. They'd explore, return, explore further. The caregiver's reliability gave them the safety to range outward. Infants with inconsistent caregivers, sometimes warm, sometimes withdrawn, sometimes present, sometimes not, did something different. They didn't explore at all. They stayed close. They monitored. Their entire energy was directed not at the world, but at the caregiver, trying to predict, manage, and secure what they couldn't count on. Ainsworth called this anxious ambivalent attachment. John Bowlby would later describe these infants as experiencing the world through a fundamentally different lens. Not is the world worth exploring, but am I safe right now? If you grew up in an environment where warmth was inconsistent, where love was real but unreliable, where approval came and went without logic, your nervous system learned to run that same question on repeat. Not once, not in moments of real threat, constantly, and the reassurance seeking is the answer your adult brain found to quiet it. The external confirmation standing in for the internal security that was never consistently installed. Section 3. Why IT backfires. Here's the part that makes this genuinely painful. Reassurance seeking doesn't just fail to solve the anxiety, it makes it worse. Over time, structurally, clinical psychologist Stanley Rachman, in his research on anxiety and what he called safety behaviors, the things people do to manage anxiety rather than confront it, found something important. Every time you use a safety behavior to reduce anxiety, you accomplish a thing simultaneously. You temporarily lower the alarm, and you permanently confirm to your brain that the alarm was justified. Because you acted on it, you treated it as a real threat by responding to it. Your brain takes notes. Last time this felt threatening, we asked for reassurance and the threat went away. Next time it feels threatening, we should ask for reassurance. The reassurance is reducing the anxiety in the moment and increasing your sensitivity to the triggers that produce it. And here's where it gets painful in a different direction. The people around you feel it. They don't always name it, but they feel the weight of being someone else's anxiety management system. And over time, not through malice, not through withdrawal of love, but through the exhaustion of being asked to hold something no external person can hold, distance enters where it wasn't there before. The reassurance seeking that was meant to protect the relationship becomes the thing that slowly strains it. And the strain produces more anxiety, which produces more reassurance seeking. Section 4. What IT actually looks like. You might recognize some of this in specific moments. You ask if they're okay. They say yes. You ask again 30 minutes later. Differently worded. You post something, a thought, a piece of work, something that required courage to share, and then you check. Not once. Every few minutes. The number of responses as a real-time score of whether it was worth sharing. Whether you were worth sharing. Someone in your life seems quiet. You interpret the quiet as evidence of something wrong between you. You ask. They say nothing's wrong. You believe them for 40 minutes. You say something in a group, something honest, something real, and for the rest of the evening your attention is split between the present moment and the internal audit of how it landed. The conversation you're in and the jury still deliberating on the one that ended. This isn't who you are. It's a pattern you were handed, installed by circumstances you didn't choose, running on a nervous system that learned it needed to keep checking. Because the last time it didn't, something changed without warning. Section 5. What the people without IT have. Here's what actually separates people who need constant reassurance from those who don't. Not confidence, not a different personality type, not thicker skin. Attachment researcher Daniel Ziegel at UCLA spent decades studying what he called earned security, and what he found is the most important thing in this entire conversation. Adults who grew up with anxious or avoidant attachment, people who should, by developmental logic, be trapped in those patterns forever, could develop what functioned neurologically and psychologically like secure attachment. Not through pretending, not through willpower, through coherent narrative. What he meant, people who could tell a clear, honest story of their own history, who could name what happened, acknowledge how it affected them, and understand it without being still controlled by it, showed patterns of relationship behavior indistinguishable from people who had secure attachment from childhood. The healing wasn't amnesia. It wasn't getting over it. It was integration, the past understood well enough that it stops running the present on autopilot. The people who don't need constant reassurance aren't built from different material. They have a developed relationship with their own internal state. A relationship where they know what they think and feel and value, independent of what someone else confirms. When uncertainty arises, and it arises for everyone, they can tolerate it long enough to ask themselves before they ask someone else. That tolerance is the thing to build, not confidence. Tolerance for the gap between the question and the answer. That gap is where the reassurance seeking lives. And slowly, one instance at a time, you can learn to stay in the gap longer before reaching for external confirmation. The next time you catch yourself about to seek reassurance, before you send the message, before you ask the question, pause for 30 seconds. And in that 30 seconds, ask what you actually think. Not what you're afraid they think, what you know. That 30-second practice is the beginning of the thing the securely attached person has. Not given at birth. Build slowly, honestly, one held moment at a time. Outro. Needing reassurance in a character flaw. It's a nervous system that learned it accurately, given its history that it couldn't trust the ground to stay solid. So, it keeps checking. The checking made sense then. It costs you more than it gives you now. The people who don't need it aren't built from stronger stuff. They had access to something, a consistent presence, an environment that stayed safe enough for long enough that let their nervous system learn to trust. Most people who end up on a video like this didn't have that. Not through anyone's cruelty. Just through the ordinary randomness of how families and circumstances work. You can earn what you weren't given. The research says so. Ziegel's work says so. Every recovered anxious attachment adult says so. It takes time. It takes honesty about your own story. It takes tolerating the gap again and again, imperfectly until the gap becomes somewhere you can stand. Not forever, just long enough to learn that you were okay in it. If you want to understand the attachment patterns underneath this, the next video goes directly into that.